Okay, here's an idea. I'm just throwing this out there. You guys can give me your opinions. I get commissioned from an artist a beautiful oil painting of King. Okay, like it's absolutely glorious. Like we do it like in old school Victorian style portraits. Like he's wearing his gimp suit, he's got his wings in the fire. You know, it looks like a really, really good high quality oil painting of King with his mask off, of course, with those flowing locks and all that stuff, right? Then I get it framed in a comically large frame, all right? And I just like put it, like I take down Nightmare Luffy, I take down the Devil's Luck Pirates, I take down everything on this side of the bookcase, and then we just have this giant, really expensive framed painting of King just back there the entire time we do this, right? Or I could put it over there, just replace the wall scrolls, and just like, here is King. You know, like, what do you think about that? What do you think about that idea? I'm considering it. Okay, so anyway, hey everybody, how are you doing? I'm Tekking101. This is Barry. He's a brick, in case you haven't caught up to the plot by now. Last chapter 1035, Zoro versus King. Possibly the last chapter of the year. I don't know, I've been hearing some stuff, because around Christmas it's always funny exactly when the next chapter will come out. I know a lot of times chapters sometimes are released like the day of or day after Christmas, so we might get one more chapter squeezed out before the end of the year. But even if this was the last chapter of the year, I think it's a pretty good chapter to go out on, okay? We had the chapter 1034 where Sanji defeats Queen, and now we have 1035 where Zoro defeats King. It seemingly defeats King. In fact, I'm actually going to start off the video with that. I'm going to do the things Tekking missed in the chapter segment, because there was quite a few things that I missed in the chapter, but that's what this follow-up video is for. You see, that other videos where I put on the suit and tie and dance around like an idiot and play with dolls and stuff. This one is where I sit down at my desk with my brick companion and I actually think about stuff that happened. Play the intro.
But other things Tekking missed in the chapter.
Why is King so hot? Okay, so a couple of things before we even get to the Zoro and King fight. First and foremost, when Sanji defeats Queen, I said that he picks up Chuji, the little mouse of Osome, the geisha, and presents him to her, right? That was actually not the case. The entire time that battle was going on, Sanji actually picked up the mouse beforehand and hid the mouse inside of his jacket pocket, okay, to keep him safe. And then he beat the crap out of Queen with Ifrit Jambe, and then after the battle was over and he sends Queen rocketing off into parts unknown, that's when he takes out the mouse from his breast pocket and presents it to Osome, and then immediately passes out. And we have that nice little flashback where Sanji remembers feeding the mice in the German kingdom. You know, that was the first people, well, not people, they were mice, but first animals that he made food for, and that's really what he, you know, found out, like discovered his love of cooking and stuff like that. So that was a nice little scene there. Next up, this is not really something I missed because we're not really sure what this means yet, but I wanted to bring it up. King's tattoo. Okay, so the really cool tattoo we see on the, actually, wait a second, it was the left side of his face, which... Okay, that's interesting. All right, so first and foremost, what exactly it was, I said it was an olive branch because I thought it looked very similar to that. Olive branches are usually indicative of peace. It's like a symbol for peace and stuff like that. And so I thought that would be an interesting little, you know, juxtaposition kind of, where it's just, I don't know if that's the correct word to use, but like the idea that maybe the Lunarians were all about peace and understanding in the world. Yes, they were revered as gods, but maybe they were very peaceful gods, and they ruled over the world with kind of like benevolence and stuff like that. And then everything changed when the world government attacked and wiped them off the face of the red line and everything. Maybe they were like, oh, we mean you no harm, and just like, we're taking your home. He's like, but we mean you no harm. And the world government just took their home anyway. So that would have been an interesting like parallel to that. But I also heard a lot of people saying that it wasn't really an olive branch, it was just a vine. Just generically, just a vine. And the idea is that a vine is a very durable and very tenacious. There's a word I didn't just spend 3 minutes looking up on thesaurus.com to find. Very tenacious plant. A vine can pretty much grow anywhere. Maybe even in the rock bed of the red line. We really haven't seen any plant life at all growing on the red line itself. We saw the mangrove trees growing at the bottom where the red port is, and we also have the artificial forest, but that was not something that was there originally. That was because of the science technology of like Vegapunk and the world government. They made like an artificial forest, an artificial garden on the top where Marie Marie Joie is, okay? So all of the stuff with Marie Joie, that's all artificial and everything like that. But the idea that it's a vine because it's like King is a Lunarian, and Lunarians have been stated by Queen to be able to survive in any natural environment, very much like a vine would be able to. So there you go. Also, the other thing is that, you know, I'd be remiss to mention the fact that Luffy, as well as Dragon and Garp, all the members of the monkey family, have a scar on, or some kind of identifying mark on the, wait, hold on, I'm always gonna mess this up. Okay. It's, okay, like Nightmare Luffy over there, right? It's like the right side from my perspective, but from his side, it would be his left side of his face, right? Okay. And so Luffy has his scar that he self-inflicted back when he was a kid to show how tough he was to Shanks. And then Dragon, Luffy's father, has the tattoo. And then Garp also has like a scar, like a crescent scar over his eye. We actually don't know how he got that, but he might have gotten it at... Actually, I don't remember. I gotta go back and look at that image from when he was fighting at God Valley. Maybe he got it at... No, I know, it was before that. It was before that. Because during, Film Z, when we saw his backstory, we saw him, Sengoku, and Osuru when they first joined the Marines, even at that young age, when Garp was like a teenager, like in his early 20s, he already had the scar on his face, okay? So it might have been something similar with Garp. It might have been like a test of like, toughness to show how strong he was, maybe back when he was a kid or something similar to Luffy, right? So I'm just saying, though, if Lunarians have something to do with the Void Century and maybe connect back to the Will of D in some way, maybe the whole idea on why that, the D clan have that identifying mark, like Dragon has that tattoo, maybe it's because of the Lunarians. Maybe the Will of D, the Clan of D, Joy Boy, work together with the Lunarians to fight against the world government, and as an act of solidarity, so to speak, they all had like a mark on their faces. Now, when it comes to King, it might actually even not be a tattoo. It might be like a birthmark or something, because he's a Lunarian, so it's a different species, so it's possible that they're all born with maybe an identifying mark on like the left side of their face. We saw the flashback with Kaido and King when King was freed from Punk Hazard, and he seemed to be like maybe around a teenager at that point. So either he got that tattoo when he was really young, maybe like an act of like a ritual or like something religious to do with the Lunarians, or it's not a tattoo at all and it was like a birthmark and he was just born with it, okay? But either way, it might be a thing that like the Clan of D, as an act of solidarity with the Lunarians, adopted that symbol or some identifying mark. Now, with the case with Dragon, it makes sense that he has a tattoo, like he willingly got a tattoo because Dragon probably knows the true history, or at least knows a lot about it. Maybe doesn't know the whole gist of the Void Century, but probably knows a lot more about Joy Boy and the other stuff that happened back then with the Clan of D than other people do. And Dragon probably also knows what the D stands for, I would assume. Garp and Luffy might very well not know that, and of course they self-inflicted their wounds, at least we can assume with Garp. So it's possible that, like, history is going along this line. Even without them knowing it, they're marking themselves like the Clan of D did, along with the Lunarians, to help fight the world government. If that makes sense, I hope it makes sense. Next thing is, this is something interesting, little scene here. The scene when Zoro is clashing with King, and King takes out his katana and uses that sword breaker function to trap his swords. I originally said, oh, Zoro just, like, jumped back instead of trying to, like, free his swords last time, and that got him, they got caught and got thrown away, and Zoro had to recover them. I thought Zoro just, like, clashed with the sword breaker, and he's like, oh, not that again, and he just jumped back or whatever. No, he actually used a burst of his Conqueror's Haki in order to free it. Conqueror's Haki is such a... it's simultaneously the most interesting form of Haki, but it's also, you could be seen as, like, not the most boring, but, like, let me put it this way. Observation, we kind of know all the stuff you can do with that. Like, you can sense presence of others. You have, like, a sixth sense. You can see a little bit into the future with the high-spec observation that Katakuri had. You have the empath ability that Otohime had. Like, there's a bunch of different applications with observation. Armament, likewise, you can, coat your arm with the vulcanization to punch harder. You can send the armament Haki into another object to destroy it from within. You can use that, like, invisible Haki like the Admirals used. So, like, armament has a bunch of different uses as well. And then you get to Conquerors, and it's just, Conquerors is just a lot more ambiguous. Like, the set rules aren't exactly laid out by Oda yet. It's like, you can use it to knock out people with a weaker willpower than yours. You can use it to summon lightning. Zoro was also using it, and, like, steam and smoke and stuff was coming off of his swords when he was using it, so there's another thing. You can use it to, like, create localized shockwaves or, like, little bursts like Zoro did to, like, freeze free himself from the Swordbreaker. So it's just that, like, Conqueror's Haki seems to have a bunch of different applications. I guess at the fundamental level, it's taking your willpower, your raw will, and forcing it or exerting it on other objects or things, I guess, is the best way to look at it, but that also crosses over with armament, which makes sense given the fact that you can combine conquerors with armament, alright? It's just that the set rules for it aren't exactly there yet. Maybe Oda will go into a little bit more detail later, but he did do that. And then last thing, the final thing I wanted to say here was that at the end of the chapter, when Zoro used his King of Hell Santoryu-style Dragon Damnation, slices right through King's attack and slices him, I only saw Zoro slice off one of King's wings, or like half of one of his wings, and I'm like, oh man, that's not bad. You know, Zoro managed to deal some heavy damage there. You know, King might not be able to fly anymore. But no, then you look even closer, you zoom into that panel, Zoro did not only slice off King's wing, he also sliced his sword in half and sliced off his damn arm. Like, his arm is just gone. So, like, the idea here is that King... Let me go grab one of my swords. It's ironic I'm using Enma for this, but here we go. So, like, you know, King summons his giant magma fire dragon thing. Zoro's coming at him with Santoryu. King kind of raises his sword up like this. And so he's got sword, arm, and then his wing behind him. And so Zoro just... shing sword, shing arm, and then slices off his wing for good measure. And so, yeah, I said at the end of that chapter, that's just probably going to be the end of the fight between Zoro and King, kind of the same way we had the end of the fight between Sanji and Queen. But I'm like, yeah, that pretty much cinches it right there. The fact that he sliced off his wing and his sword and his arm. Now, could King still fight? I mean, absolutely. He might not be able to fly as well anymore, but he might be able to kind of stay airborne. And, you know, he has the ability to manipulate fire, so he could probably automatically... That would actually be really cool next chapter to see him just ignite his arm to, like, cauterize the wound. So it's just like, oh, you think you've won just because you've cut off my arm? This isn't Bleach. And then just lights... Well, I guess it would be Bleach, because a lot of times characters lose arms in Bleach and they still fight, or they just regrow it. King just regrows his arm, except it's made out of fire, and just like... I'd be like, I'd buy it. But, you know, I think just logically speaking, since we are at the end of the year, I think, you know, we are going to be ending Wano next year. I think Oda's just going to kind of push through this and be like, all right, King is defeated. Not dead or anything, but defeated. And so next year, we're going to be moving on to the Kaido and Luffy fight, the final battle. We're also going to have Kid and Law go up against Big Mom for that finale. Some other fights going on, like with the CP0 and everything like that. And then the whole thing with the idea of the world government approaching Wano, but all of that stuff's going to be resolved next year. I think Wano's going to end next year, probably maybe around the summer, and that's just what I'm thinking, right? Well, anyway, yeah, those are just things that I missed in the chapter, but now let's go into a little bit more detail with the flashback that we had, because that was easily the most interesting part out of the whole thing. I mean, Zoro with Conqueror's Haki, it's really cool, but I'm a YouTuber that really likes his timelines and continuities, so anytime that we get a new flashback, and I kind of prefer it when Oda does not specify how far back it was, because then it's more fun for me to try to figure it out and piece it all together. It's almost like Oda is testing us. Like, yeah, here's a flashback with King and Kaido. I'm not going to specify how long ago it was. I'm not going to specify how old Kaido was or how old King was during the flashback. I gave you all the hints, all the extra information you need from the Vivre cards, from the data books, from the SBSs, from earlier in the manga. You piece it together. And I'm like, I love it. It's so much fun. Okay. So with that being said, in the review, I said there's like two possibilities here. Either one possibility is that Kaido was captured pretty much right after God Valley. At the God Valley, Rox was apparently killed. He was defeated. God Valley disappeared from the annals of history, most likely because the world government willed it. But the idea is the crew disbanded at that point. Big Mom, Whitebeard, even though she wasn't really referred to as Big Mom and he wasn't referred to Whitebeard at that point, just Charlotte Linlin, Edward Newgate, Captain John, Wang Zhi! Gotta be careful. So I was messing around with the settings. This microphone's a good microphone. I just botched the settings last time, so if there was a little bit of background noise, I apologize. But I will understand your glory, Shure microphone. Wang Shi! All right, so anyway, they all separated, right? And so the idea is Big Mom gave Kaido the Uo no Mi there so he could survive and escape. So I guess it's feasible that he could have been captured by the world government right at that point, and he was just locked in Punk Hazard for years. That's where they got the lineage factor, and then he finally decided to break out. But what I really think probably happened, going by Kaido's dialogue and some other stuff, is that Kaido did manage to escape God Valley. Like, he used the Uo no Mi, and he just flew away from God Valley, all right? Now, he just got the fruit, so he didn't have perfect control over the Ua, but he would have had better control over it than, like, Momonosuke did when he first ate it. Number one, that was an artificial version, so that was, like, the diet, caffeine-free knockoff version of Kaido's fruit, right? So the idea that, like, all right, Momo had a hard time controlling the flame clouds. Also, Kaido was older. He was 21 years old when God Valley occurred, so I think he would at least understand enough to be able to summon the clouds and escape God Valley, all right? So after escaping, he went somewhere, and he was all by himself. He was all alone. Rox was gone. Everybody was gone that he viewed as a family at that point. And so I can imagine at that point, at age 21, Kaido decided, was like, you know what? Screw it. I'm gonna be my own pirate. I'm gonna rule the world all by myself because I'm super strong and I got a kanabo and I'm a dragon now. That's really cool. I'm gonna rule the world, right? And so he's like 21 when this happens, right? And then he goes out into the world and he tries to do that multiple times, but he fails multiple times. Remember back when Kaido was first introduced, it was like he was captured by pirates and, other Yonko and Marines and world government and scientists. Like, I think it was like 18 times or something like that. He was captured quite a bit. Now, you could argue that later on in his life, Kaido was like willingly letting himself get captured because that was his hobby to try to end his life, right? So maybe you could see like Kaido whenever he was bored like 5 years ago, he just like, I'm bored. Oh, well, I'll just walk over and get captured by the Marines, see if they can entertain me for a couple of weeks, and then they can't end him, so he's just like, whatever, all right, time to go back to Wano. So you get the impression he might have done that, but I think the vast majority of his career as a pirate getting captured by other crews in the Marines, I think most of that happened during this period of his life. Right after the Rox crew was disbanded, and he was really young, and he was just impatient and hot-headed, and he thought he can rule the world just because he had raw strength, okay? And so he attempted that, and it failed. And I like to think the time that he was in Punk Hazard and he met King, that might have not even have been the first time he was locked up by the government. Maybe that was the first time he was at Punk Hazard, but not the first time he was captured by the Marines, right? And so for that reason, I said in the review, maybe it was around 30 to 32, 33 years ago. King in that flashback looked to be about a teenager, right? And so he's 47 right now. So if you dial it back 30 years, then he would have been 17. That looks about right there. And so if that was the situation, okay. But, I was looking at some other depictions of Kaido throughout history, okay? So this is an image of Kaido that we get. This is the earliest confirmed, like, exactly when this occurred, what he looked like, okay? Because everything that we get from when he was on Rox's crew, that's all, like, silhouettes, so we're not really sure. There was even one silhouette where he had the mustache when he was on Rox's crew, but when we see him in this flashback here, he doesn't have the mustache. He has, like, a goatee in chapter 1035 when he meets King, right? So this is an anime-only error, then, where unless he shaved, unless he's, like, he grew out the epic mustache, and then he shaved it, and then God Valley happened, he got captured, and then he grew it out again, but I don't think that's the case. I don't think that's what Oda's going for here. But this image right here, this is when Moria attacked Wano, okay? And Kaido is 36 years old right here. This was 23 years ago, all right? Now, technically speaking, we see him before this, but only as a dragon. We don't see him in his human form, in his ancient giant form, until this is the flashback, okay? And so in this flashback, when he clashes with Moria's crew 23 years ago in Wano, he already has the established mustache, all right? Kaido's mustache is the key to understanding these flashbacks, okay? So pay attention to that mustache, all right? So then, Years later, when Odin is executed, Kaido is 39 years old. This was 20 years ago. He's 59 right now. This is what Kaido looked like at the execution. And he looks pretty damn close to what he looks like right now, except he has legs. His legs are more prominent than they are right now. Because at some point, Kaido just decided, you know, upper body strength is where it's at. Screw leg day. And so what happened there, right? So with that being said, one of the questions I have is, when exactly did Kaido arrive at Wano Kuni, right? When did exactly he set up shop there at Onigashima? When he was talking to Odin, when Odin had the fight with Kaido in the Udon region, he mentions that, like, I just had my castle built on Onigashima. That's the reason why Kaido met Odin and his scabbards in Udon, because he didn't want to ruin his castle that was just built. All right? So it was just finished construction about 20 years ago, which means it was under construction for a few years before that. Kaido's mansion is huge. There was a lot of work that had to be done to put into it, so it's not the kind of thing you could just build in like a year or so. I imagine it was under construction for a long period of time. See, a lot of the stuff we get from Odin's flashback is told from Odin's perspective, so when Odin is not in Wano, we really don't know much about what's happening in Wano. So we know that Odin left Wano 30 years ago to travel with Whitebeard and then eventually with Roger, right? And so then he returned to Wano very briefly to just capture the poneglyph, the road poneglyph, to help out Roger find Laugh-Tale, okay? So Roger was executed 24 years ago, so it was about 25 years ago that he went back to Wano, and he already noticed things were up. He already started to see that there were factories, there was smoke billowing, Orochi was taking over. So I would like to think that Kaido arrived in Wano and started allying with Orochi sometime between 30 and 25 years in the past, okay? It was somewhere around there, which would put Kaido in between 29 years of age and 34 years of age, okay? So somewhere between that, that's when Kaido ran into Orochi. They, you know, made the alliance. Orochi started constructing all of the factories to manufacture weapons for the Beast Pirates and everything like that. Kaido started he's like, wow, this is cool. This island is made out of a giant muffin. I mean, an ancient giant skull. I'm gonna build my castle here. And then they hired that carpenter that, you know, hired Frankie later on, that old dude, and they're like, build me a castle on Onigashima. I want it built into the actual skull itself. Can you do that? And he's like, I also want a giant festival stage because we're gonna be throwing lots of parties here. And so the carpenter's like, all right, it'll take a couple of years, but sure, I'll build it. So, you know, if it was something along those lines, like if Kaido showed up to Wano, I don't know, let's say 27 years ago, okay? So Odin was off traveling with Whitebeard and everything, so Kaido shows up 27 years ago. That gives Orochi a couple of years to start building these factories, start manufacturing weapons, so when Odin comes back 25 years ago, he witnesses all that stuff, and Kaido's mansion gets under construction. It's finished 20 years ago. That's when Odin and the Scabbards fight against Kaido. They lose, and then Odin is executed shortly thereafter, all right? And so in terms of the timelines and the ages of all these characters, I think that syncs up pretty well, okay? So then we have the question with King, when Kaido first met. So the idea was that King was captured at some point before this, and, you know, he was put into Punk Hazard to be tested on, basically. And Kaido mentions they were doing these endurance tests for him because he's super tough as a Lunarian. The government probably put him through some of the worst tortures you can possibly imagine. They probably went through the ringer there, you know, fire, cold, electricity, like everything they could possibly think of. Like, oh, you're a Lunarian, you can survive all these environments. Well, let's put that to the ultimate test. And so he was probably tortured on the daily basis, which makes sense why he would just go with Kaido. Like, he has no idea who Kaido is. You know, like, he asks him, hey, can you change the world? And Kaido's like, hell, I'm the only one that can change the world. And he's like, all right. So it was probably a pretty easy choice for King at that point. Considering we've established that Lunarians pretty much age at the same rate that humans do, given the fact what we've seen with King, I like to think that, yeah, the Lunarians were kicked off the red line. Probably a decent number of them survived. Then again, it might be a situation where, like, even a small number of them can propagate and live for a lot longer just because they can survive in any sort of situation. Like, let me explain something. Like, when was this? Somebody would have to look this up, but like 10,000 years ago, 15,000 years ago, in our world, not in the One Piece world, there was a huge volcanic eruption, I think around the Philippines, somewhere in that area of the globe. And the resulting impact of that and the resulting like winter that came about because of this giant volcanic eruption, a lot of people think that actually like bottlenecked human genetics, where a lot of humans actually died there, and so the gene pool was kind of limited, and so that kind of actually affected our genetics to this day. All right, so to imply that if this volcanic eruption never happened in our world and the human population was never dropped to that certain bottleneck, we might actually look a little different right now. Like the way that we evolved might end up a little bit different because our genetics weren't like, reduced to that level. So maybe it's a sort of thing because the Lunarians are adept at living and surviving. Like that's their whole thing, is survival. Even if their numbers were reduced to a very minimal amount, like maybe even 100 or so, like that's not a maintainable population for long periods of time, like 800 of the Void Century, but because of the way their genetics work, it can be, okay? So that's maybe the reason, because I can't imagine the world government would leave a lot of them, there wouldn't be a lot of them around, right? Like King might very well be the only one left, and so you might have a situation where, there was only a few hundred and they were separated and they were, all over the world, but they managed to live on, okay? And that's why the government wants them so bad for research and development, probably trying to figure out a way to make like super soldiers that have Lunarian DNA or something like that. That's probably what King was there for. Actually, King was captured for a long period of time. They definitely took DNA samples and lineage factor stuff from King. So there might actually be an explanation for that. Like there might be a situation where maybe they did develop some kind of like Captain America Lunarian super soldier serum at some point, and maybe some of the Marines actually have that shit inside of them, right? Or they maybe developed it and added it to the Pacifista technology. Vegapunk was probably the one that was the head of all this. If this was only 30-something years ago, it couldn't have been more than 38 years ago, because any further back than that, we have Rox's crew still around. So if it was only 30 to 38 years ago that Kaido and King were experimented on, Vegapunk was around, and he was definitely doing stuff back then. That's probably back actually a little bit maybe after Mads disbanded, and he was doing his own thing now for the government, right? So yeah, Vegapunk was probably at the top of this. So I guarantee you the government, even if they don't, like if they did not develop some kind of super soldier serum or something, but they do have probably samples of King's like flesh and DNA to use later, maybe for their cloning technology, like to make an army of clones similar to what Judge has with the Germa, except they're all Lunarian base, like a Lunarian DNA based clones, and they're wicked strong and have wicked endurance and all that kind of stuff, right? So that's the kind of stuff you can kind of see the government doing, you know what I mean? Yeah. One more thing to bring up was, and I mentioned this in the review, so I don't want to go over it again exactly, but like the idea that when Kaido was leaving, he told King specifically, like, I will never sell you out, okay? Under my wing that you will be safe, okay? And so that kind of implies that at some point in Kaido's life, he was probably betrayed by pirates, because later on, when the samurai were all gathering together and we were waiting for the Straw Hats to show up, Kaido was like, oh, Woro, you allied yourself with the Straw Hats? Don't you understand? They're all pirates. They might be different kinds of pirates, but pirates are pirates. They betray you all the time. So that implies that, like, yeah, Kaido was betrayed by somebody. And you know what? This is not my idea. This is not my theory. I read this around. But, like, the interesting idea here is that I thought maybe he was betrayed by Rox, because Rox, from what we understand, was kind of a douche. But there was another perspective I saw a lot of people talking about. What if it was Whitebeard? Yeah, because the idea is Whitebeard, the idea of joining Rox's crew to take over the world, that doesn't really seem to be Whitebeard's objective, because Whitebeard always wanted a family, from what we understand, right? So, what if it was like at God Valley, Whitebeard was the one that just left the crew to die, because Whitebeard also mentioned they were not really a family. They did not get along very well, okay? They actually got into arguments all the time, and it was a very difficult crew to be on, okay? And that's why the next crew that Whitebeard had was like a family, and they treated him like a father, okay? So, if that's what we're going with here, let's say that, like, they were fighting at God Valley against Roger and against Garp, and Whitebeard left. And then that was like, oh my god, you left just when we needed you. If you were here, we might have been able to win. Or, oh, wow, what if Whitebeard went over on the side of Roger and Garp? That's another thing. Maybe he didn't leave, because that's kind of cowardly for Whitebeard, but what if he switched sides? Or not even that, what if he just, like, fought alongside Roger instead? Maybe something like that. And so that got Kaido all messed up in the head, you know, like the ideas of loyalty and like, what were we to you or whatever, like that kind of stuff, right? So if that's Kaido's past, and he was probably sold out maybe a few other times by people and everything like that, just being sold off like, you know, into the government or whatever, it's like, that's Kaido, he's over there, capture him and whatever. So the idea of Kaido making friends and having comrades was probably something he had a difficult time doing, right? So when he met King in this lab and he saw him being tortured and like, you know, mistreated, he's like, all right, I'll free you, you come with me, and I'm going to start my own pirate crew, because he realized that being strong just on its own is not enough to take over the world. You need to have a crew, you need to have people you can depend on. And so he said, I will never sell you out ever. And that's true to this day. Now Queen, on the other hand, Queen has, like, he treated the waiters and the pleasures like garbage and everything like that, but that was on Queen, that wasn't on Kaido, and Kaido might have actually not have been a fan of that if he found that out. Now, what else? Oh, also, he cut off Orochi's head, but Orochi was never part of the Beast Pirates, okay? That was never a thing. Kaido probably has an ironclad rule of, like, if Kaido himself, you know, welcomes you into the crew, he's not going to betray you, okay? Now, when it comes to, like, the lower-ranking fodder soldiers, maybe they might be a little bit more dispensable, but when it comes to the All-Stars, King, Queen, and Jack, and the Toby Roppo, like we found out with Ulti, it's actually perfect with Ulti in Page 1's backstory, where their father was a pirate Kaido used to sail with, who could have very well been a pirate on Rox's crew. You know, Ulti in Page 1's dad could have been Captain John, could have been Silver Axe, could have been Wang Ji, and so they just showed up on his doorstep one day, and they're like, our father knew you, Mr. Kaido. We don't have anywhere else to go. And so Kaido was like, all right, come on in. I won't betray you, you know? And ironically enough, people have brought this up. Not even ironic. It's just dickishness on Kaido's part. Kaido is a better father to King and to the Toby Roppo, like Ulti in Page 1, by leaps and bounds more than he is a better father to Yamato, which is so sad, but it's okay, because Yamato wants nothing to do with Kaido at this point. There's a lot of trauma there, there's a lot of stress, and it would be really cool if Yamato just breaks away completely, leaves Wano, joins the Straw Hats. It's the best way to really stick it to Kaido at that point, right? Okay, awesome. Anyway, that was the video. Hope you guys enjoyed. There was a lot of stuff to unpack in this last chapter. I don't have any dinosaur facts for you today. I'm sorry. We might be transitioning to another form, although I don't know, because dinosaurs, there's so many dinosaurs, I could literally go all of 2022 with doing dinosaur facts, but, you know, it depends on when I get bored and I want to move on to the rest of the alphabet. I don't know. Anyway, your dinosaur fact today is velociraptors were actually very tiny. They were the size of, like, turkeys. There you go. All right. Hope you guys enjoyed. Tekking and Barry signing out. Really hope the microphone worked this time. I had it set up last time only on stereo, and it's a mono mic, so it only came out of one speaker, so I had to do some post on that. I also didn't have it turned up high enough, so I had to boost it in post, and I'm just like, ah, crap. And people were like, oh, the microphone's not really that great. I'm like, no, it is. That's just me messing up. I can tinker with this. I can make it work. Hope it works better this time. Thanks for watching, everybody. Signing out.